Nobody on the station could explain why the lights in briefing chamber 9 had gone cold. The Vethani had booked it 14 hours in advance. They had filed the reservation through the Concord Administrative Annex, paid the surcharge for extended session acoustic baffling, and submitted a formal occupancy projection of 46 delegates, 12 advisory staff, and a security contingent whose headcount had been redacted, but was widely understood to be somewhere between 20 and enough. The chamber had been prepped accordingly. Seating configured for a full diplomatic corps, translation banks initialized for 11 language matrices, and the environmental controls set to the particular temperature and humidity range that the Vethani considered appropriate for what they called a structural determination session, which was their term for the kind of meeting where you told someone what was going to happen to them while they sat in a chair that was slightly too low. The lights had been working at 07:00 station time. By 07:40, the portside overhead array was out. By 07:55, the starboard array had joined it. At 08:10, the facilities coordinator, a Prathani named Dulsk whose professional demeanor could best be described as anxious but load-bearing, had completed his third diagnostic pass and determined that the failure was not electrical, not firmware, not a scheduling conflict with maintenance, and not the result of the thermal regulation dispute that had darkened 3 rooms on Deck 12 last month. The lights simply were not working, and Dulsk could not explain why, and the Vethani were arriving in 50 minutes. Commander Sareth Tenek of the Vethani Diplomatic Expeditionary Corps arrived 42 minutes early because Commander Tenek did everything early, aggressively, and with what his subordinates privately called anticipatory hostility. He was tall even by Vethani standards, 2.5 meters of elongated limb, narrow thorax, and angular joint articulation that gave his movements the quality of something being folded and unfolded by a machine with excellent tolerances. His skin was a dark matte gray that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and his eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a shallow arc across his upper face, had no visible iris, only a deep amber luminescence that shifted in brightness according to his emotional state. At rest, the glow was muted. When Tenek was displeased, the glow intensified until his subordinates could read briefing materials by the light of his face. His face was currently very bright. "The chamber is dark," Tenek said. He was standing in the doorway, his 2 primary arms folded across his thorax, and his 2 secondary arms braced against the doorframe at a height that suggested he was considering whether to enter or to simply expand until the room conformed to his posture. Dulsk, who reached approximately the height of Tenek's lower sternum, looked up. "The overhead arrays are experiencing a diagnostic anomaly. I have requisitioned portable illumination units from the maintenance depot on Deck 7. They will arrive within 20 minutes. The session begins in 48 minutes. The portable units will be operational 28 minutes before the session begins, Commander. The configuration I specified requires overhead directional lighting with a color temperature of 6200 Kelvin, staged to place the respondent's position in 300 lux of diffuse warm and the advisory gallery in 160 lux of cool ambient. The portable units from Deck 7 produce omnidirectional light at a fixed color temperature of 5400 Kelvin. They will not produce the specified differential." Dulsk blinked twice, which was his physiological equivalent of absorbing the information that his day had just become significantly worse. "I was not aware the lighting specifications were part of the filed reservation." Appendix C. Appendix C is typically reserved for catering preferences. "I have repurposed it." Tenek walked into the chamber. The emergency lighting cast him from below, which made his already angular frame look like a geological formation that had opinions. He moved to the far end of the room, where the respondent's position had been arranged. A single chair behind a narrow table, facing the curved gallery of 46 advisory seats that rose in a gentle amphitheater toward the rear wall. The chair was standard Concord diplomatic issue, contoured for multi-species use, adjustable height, with armrests that could accommodate most skeletal configurations. The table was bare except for a water carafe and a single data terminal. "This is adequate," Tenek said, in the tone of someone who had decided to be generous about a situation he regarded as beneath his attention. "I am pleased, Commander." "The human delegation, when do they arrive?" "The manifest indicates a delegation of 1. Tenek's upper eyes brightened by a fraction. His lower eyes did not change, which was the Vethani equivalent of hearing something that was simultaneously amusing and beneath contempt. 1. One individual, a representative designated as cultural and strategic liaison, seconded from Earth's Provisional Diplomatic Bureau. "We have brought 46 delegates, Commander Sarath, 12 advisory staff, a security detail, 17 legal analysts, a historical records specialist, a strategic precedent researcher, a cartographic survey team, because the territorial determination involves stellar boundary markers that require visual reference. We have brought a delegation appropriate to a structural determination session of this magnitude." He was listing for the room. Dulsk understood this. The listing was not for information, it was architecture. Tenek was building the scale of his delegation in the acoustic space so that the number 1 would collapse under the weight of it. "And the humans have sent 1 person," Tenek said. "1 person, Commander." "Do they understand what a structural determination is?" The session brief was transmitted to the Earth Provisional Diplomatic Bureau 9 days ago. Receipt was confirmed. No questions were filed. "No questions." "None, Commander." Tenek's secondary arms released the doorframe. He stood in the dim chamber and looked at the empty respondent's chair with an expression that Dulsk had learned to read over 7 years of diplomatic facilitation. It was the expression of a commander who had prepared for opposition and been handed absence, and who was recalibrating his assessment of his adversary downward with the slow, deliberate precision of someone lowering a flag. "Bring the portable lights," Tenek said. "The specifications are irrelevant. If the humans cannot be bothered to send a delegation, I will not redesign the chamber for an audience of 1. The portable lights arrived. They were arranged in a loose semicircle that gave the chamber the quality of a rehearsal space between performances, bright enough to work by, wrong enough to notice. The 46 advisory seats filled steadily over the next 30 minutes. Vethani delegates in formal diplomatic blacks, their elongated frames folding into the seats with the coordinated precision of instruments being stored in a case. Each delegate carried a data slab loaded with the session brief, the territorial precedent archive, and the 312-page legal analysis that Tenek's strategic team had prepared over the preceding 6 months. The analysis was thorough. It was also, by design, overwhelming. A document so dense with historical precedent, regulatory citation, and cartographic evidence that responding to it in real time would require either a legal team of comparable size or the kind of institutional memory that only came from having been a spacefaring civilization for longer than the humans had been a parliamentary democracy. The security detail positioned itself along the walls, tall, matte gray figures in dark formal armor that looked like the shadows had dressed up. They were not armed in any visible sense, which was itself a statement. The Vethani did not bring weapons to diplomatic sessions because the Vethani considered the session itself to be the weapon. At 08:47, 13 minutes before the session's scheduled start, the door opened and the human walked in. She was not what Tenek had expected, and the not expecting was itself a problem, because Tenek had not expected anything. He had dismissed the delegation of 1 as evidence of either incompetence or irrelevance, and he had not built a model for what the 1 might actually look like, which meant the actual arrival caught him without a frame. He was not accustomed to being without a frame. The woman was in her late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had spent decades in rooms where posture was the first thing people assessed. She wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt, trousers with a sharp crease, and flat shoes that made exactly no sound on the chamber's stone floor. No insignia, no rank markers, no diplomatic sash. She carried a leather case, old, scuffed at the corners, with a brass clasp that looked like it had been opened and closed 10,000 times and nothing else. No data terminal, no data slab, no legal team trailing behind her. She walked to the respondent's table, set the case down, looked at the water carafe, and poured herself a glass. She drank half of it. Then she sat down, opened the case, and removed a single folder. Paper. Actual paper, in a manila folder with a handwritten tab that read in neat block letters, VETHANI Boundary Session Notes. 46 Vethani delegates looked down at her from the amphitheater. The security detail looked at her from the walls. Tenek looked at her from the command position at the gallery's apex, where his chair had been elevated by 12 centimeters to ensure that every sight line in the room terminated at his shoulders. She looked up at the gallery the way a person looked at a restaurant menu that had too many pages. Then she opened the folder and waited. Tenek activated the session. This structural determination session has been convened under Article 47 of the Concord Boundary Arbitration Framework to resolve the contested sovereignty of stellar sectors Keth 9 through Keth 14, comprising 6 star systems, 31 catalogued planetary bodies, and an estimated 400 billion cubic kilometers of navigable space. The claim is filed by the Vethani Diplomatic Expeditionary Corps. The respondent is the Earth Provisional Diplomatic Bureau. He paused. The acoustics in the chamber were not as refined as Chamber 11's. The portable lights were generating a faint hum that the baffling had not been calibrated to absorb, but the pause still carried. 46 delegates remained perfectly still. The security detail did not breathe audibly. The portable lights cast long shadows from the amphitheater's seatbacks onto the floor, and in the quiet, the woman's breathing was the only organic sound in the room. Dulsk, from his position by the door, watched the dynamic settle. He had facilitated sessions between full sovereign status civilizations and had seen opening pauses used as instruments of pressure, a silence that said, "You see what we have brought. You see what you have not." The Vethani were exceptionally good at this. Tenek in particular had a quality of stillness that made the chamber feel like a room whose walls were closing, slowly and with institutional patience. Every species Dulsk had observed in the respondent's chair had shown some response to that pressure. The Drellani had straightened. The Korusk had blinked rapidly. The Torvani had leaned back, creating distance. The human was writing something on her paper. She might have been making a grocery list. The Vethani claim rests on 3 pillars, Tenek continued. First, historical presence. The Vethani Exploratory Service catalogued the Keth sectors during the 3rd expansion, 1,742 standard cycles ago. Survey markers were placed on 14 bodies. Atmospheric readings were filed with the Concord Cartographic Registry. The sectors have been listed as Vethani surveyed territory in every official boundary document since. He looked at the human. She was making a note on her paper. She did not look up. Second, strategic necessity. The Keth sectors occupy a navigational corridor between Vethani core territory and the Vethani resource extraction zone in the outer shelf. Any disruption to transit through this corridor impacts Vethani supply logistics, fleet mobility, and economic infrastructure. The sectors are not peripheral. They are structurally essential. Another note, still no eye contact. Third, regulatory precedent. Under Article 47, sovereignty claims are adjudicated on the basis of documented presence, sustained activity, and demonstrated investment. The Vethani file contains 312 pages of precedent analysis, demonstrating that our claim satisfies every criterion the conquered has applied in the last 900 years of boundary determinations. He paused again. This pause was designed to invite a response. In Vethani diplomatic culture, the second pause after a formal claim presentation was the signal for the respondent to acknowledge the weight of the claim before presenting their position. The acknowledgement was not agreement, it was courtesy, a recognition that the argument had been heard and would be engaged with seriously. Every delegation that had ever faced the Vethani in a boundary determination had offered some version of this acknowledgement: a formal statement, a prepared counterbrief, a request for additional time to review the precedent file. The woman looked up from her notes. "Are you finished with the opening?" The question was not rude. It was not challenging or dismissive. It was the tone of a person confirming that the presenter had reached the end of a slide deck, so she knew it was her turn. But in a chamber configured for 46 delegates and a security detail and 17 legal analysts and a cartographic survey team, delivered to a commander who had spent 6 months building a 312-page argument, the flatness of it landed like a stone in a pond. "I am. Thank you," she turned a page in her folder. "Your historical presence claim, the third expansion surveys, I have a question." "Proceed." "Your survey markers on the 14 planetary bodies in the Keth sectors, what type are they?" 10X strategic precedent researcher leaned forward one row behind him and whispered something. 10X nodded without looking back. "Standard Vethani survey pylons, titanium core, embedded identification transponder, solar-powered telemetry broadcast. They have been transmitting continuously for 1,742 cycles." Transmitting to whom? The question sat in the air for 2 seconds. It was a simple question. It should not have required 2 seconds. "To the Vethani Exploratory Services Monitoring Network." "Is that network currently operational?" The strategic precedent researcher leaned forward again. This time the whisper was longer, and 10X's lower eyes dimmed slightly, which was the Vethani physiological equivalent of frowning. "The monitoring network was decommissioned during the 4th consolidation, approximately 800 cycles ago. The pylons continue to broadcast, but the receiving infrastructure was reallocated. So the markers have been transmitting survey data to a network that hasn't existed for 800 years. The markers demonstrate historical presence. They are not required to demonstrate active monitoring." "I understand. I am asking because one of your 14 markers is currently broadcasting from inside a facility that my government built 6 years ago." The chamber did not make a sound, but the quality of the silence changed. It went from the silence of attention to the silence of recalculation. 10X's upper eyes brightened. "Explain." "Keth 11, 3rd planet, northern continent. Your survey pylon is sitting on a concrete pad inside a greenhouse. We built the greenhouse as part of a soil analysis station for agricultural feasibility research. The pylon was already there when we arrived. We left it in place because it wasn't in the way, and because we assumed someone would eventually come to collect it. It has been broadcasting telemetry data through our greenhouse's communications relay for 6 years. We forward the data to a dead network address every 90 days because our systems log the outbound packets, and we did not want to interfere with what we assumed was an active survey program." She turned another page. "We also found markers on Keth 9, 2nd planet, equatorial ridge. That one is embedded in a rock formation that has shifted approximately 14 meters from its original placement due to geological activity over the past 1,700 years. It is still broadcasting, but its positional data now indicates that it is located inside a mountain rather than on its surface. Your survey records list it as a surface placement." 10X did not respond immediately. His legal analysts were conferring in the second row. The whispers had a quality that Dulsk, standing by the door, recognized. It was the sound of a large, well-prepared team discovering a detail they had not prepared for. "These are minor discrepancies," Tenek said. "The presence of the markers is the relevant fact, not their current condition." "I agree that their presence is relevant. I am noting their condition because it introduces a question about your third marker, which I have not yet mentioned." Third marker. Keth 13, fourth planet, subequatorial plane. Your survey records list a pylon at coordinates that correspond to a region now covered by a seasonal methane lake. The lake was not present during the third expansion. The planet's axial tilt has shifted by approximately 1 degree over the past 1700 years, which altered its precipitation cycle. The pylon is presumably beneath the surface. We detected a faint transponder signal at the correct frequency during our geological survey, but the signal was intermittent and degraded. We logged it and filed a report with the Concord Cartographic Registry, noting that a Vethani survey asset appeared to be submerged under approximately 4 meters of seasonal hydrocarbon accumulation. The registry acknowledged our report. No response was received from any Vethani authority. A delegate in the 5th row opened his data slab and began scrolling. The movement was quiet, but the light from the screen caught the underside of his angular jaw and threw a brief amber reflection onto the ceiling. 2 delegates in the 6th row noticed. They opened their own data slabs. Your precedent analysis cites 17 previous boundary determinations, in which the Concord evaluated not just the existence of survey infrastructure, but its operational status. In 12 of those 17 cases, the Concord ruled that non-operational or unmaintained survey infrastructure did not constitute sustained activity. Your own precedent file, page 147, paragraph 3, cites the Drelani-Korusk determination of cycle 6840, in which the Concord found that survey markers left unmonitored for more than 200 cycles had reverted to historical artifacts rather than active sovereignty indicators. She did not read from the page. She recited the citation from memory, and the recitation had the flat, unhurried rhythm of someone who had read the document so many times that its contents had become furniture in her mind. That precedent involved a species that had abandoned the territory entirely, Tenek said. The Vethani have not abandoned the Keth sectors. You have not visited them in 800 cycles. Sovereignty does not require physical presence. It requires documented claim and historical basis. I see. Then perhaps we can discuss what documented claim means in practice, because there is an additional detail regarding your survey records that I noticed during my review. Tenek's secondary arms tightened against his thorax. It was a subtle adjustment, but Dulsk recognized it. In Vethani body language, secondary arm tension during a diplomatic exchange indicated that the individual was preparing to absorb information that they expected to dislike. What detail? Your survey records for the Keth sectors list 14 planetary bodies with pylon placements. The Concord Cartographic Registry lists 31 cataloged bodies in the same sectors. Your third expansion survey covered 14 of 31, fewer than half. The remaining 17 bodies were cataloged by subsequent Concord expeditions over the following 4 centuries, none of which were Vethani. Your sovereignty claim encompasses all 31, but your documented presence covers 14. The sectors were claimed as a unit. Individual body coverage is not the standard. You are correct that sector-level claims are standard. I mention it because 3 of the 17 bodies not covered by your original survey are the 3 most commercially significant in the sectors. Keth 10, second moon, the mineral deposits I mentioned. Keth 11, third planet, the agricultural potential. And Keth 14, seventh body, a dense atmosphere gas giant with a helium-3 concentration that the Concord Resource Survey rated as commercially viable 40 cycles ago. None of those three appear in your original survey data. Two legal analysts leaned toward each other. The whisper between them lasted 6 seconds. In the chamber's acoustics, 6 seconds of whisper sounded like a long exhale through thin fabric. Your second pillar is strategic necessity. You describe the Keth sectors as a navigational corridor between your core territory and the outer shelf. I have a question about that as well. Proceed. How many Vethani vessels have transited the Keth corridor in the past 50 cycles? The strategic precedent researcher conferred with the cartographic survey team. The cartographic survey team conferred with the legal analysts. The legal analysts looked at Tenek. Tenek's face brightened by a degree that made the nearest advisory delegates shield their lower eyes. Transit records for the Keth corridor are classified under Vethani Fleet Operations Security. I understand. I am asking because the Concord Transit Registry, which is public, shows that 0 Vethani-registered vessels have filed a transit plan through the Keth sectors in the past 50 cycles. The corridor you describe as structurally essential to your supply logistics has not been used by your fleet in half a century. Alternative routes were developed. Yes, the Nareth bypass. Your fleet rerouted to it 48 cycles ago after the Concord Transit Authority flagged the Keth corridor as insufficiently maintained for large vessel navigation. The maintenance lapse was attributed to the decommissioning of the monitoring network 800 cycles ago. The beacons went dark. The navigational hazard markers were never updated. The corridor became unsafe for your own ships because you stopped maintaining it. She paused, not for effect. She paused because she was turning a page. I should note that the Nareth bypass adds 11 days to the transit between your core territory and the outer shelf. Your own logistics office published a cost analysis 31 cycles ago estimating that the bypass route costs the Vethani fleet approximately 900,000 resource units per cycle in additional fuel, crew rotation overhead, and scheduled delays. That analysis recommended restoring the Keth corridor to navigable condition. The recommendation was filed. No action was taken. Tenek's cartographic survey team leader shifted in the 7th row. The shift was small, a repositioning of secondary limbs, but 3 delegates ahead of him tracked the movement. When a cartographic survey team leader moved during a transit data discussion, it meant the data was landing in a part of the argument the team had not reinforced. My government has been maintaining that corridor for 6 years. We installed navigational beacons on 17 waypoints. We mapped the debris fields in the Keth 12 orbital belt and published the data to the Concord Cartographic Registry, which your own survey had marked as clear 1700 years ago. The debris has accumulated considerably since your last visit. The Keth 12 belt now contains approximately 47% more particulate mass than your survey recorded, including 3 fragments large enough to constitute a navigational hazard for any vessel above frigate class. We charted all 3 and filed the data under open access publication, so any ship transiting the corridor could avoid them. She turned another page. We also repaired 2 of your survey pylons that had suffered solar cell degradation. The repairs are logged with the Concord Facilities Office. We filed the work orders under our own provisional maintenance license because your maintenance authority could not be reached. The repairs took our engineering staff 4 hours each. We used our own components because the Vethani specification for solar cell replacement panels is no longer manufactured. The product line was discontinued approximately 300 cycles ago. Our components are compatible. They are also, as it happens, more efficient. The repaired pylons now generate 18% more telemetry throughput than their original specification. Not that anyone is receiving the telemetry. Tenek was silent for 4 seconds. His lower eyes were now at their dimmest. His upper eyes were as bright as Dulsk had ever seen them. The combination bright upper, dim lower was the Vithani expression that diplomatic protocol manuals described as contested assessment, and that Tenek's subordinates described as the look he got before he decided whether to change strategy or double down. He doubled down. The Vithani claim does not rest on current maintenance. It rests on original survey, documented claim, and 1,700 years of uncontested sovereignty. The humans arrived 6 years ago. 6 years does not supersede 17 centuries. I agree that 6 years does not supersede 17 centuries of active sovereignty, but your sovereignty has not been active. It has been nominal. Your markers broadcast to a dead network. Your fleet does not use the corridor you claim is essential. Your survey data is 1,700 years out of date. The territory you claim as structurally vital has been structurally neglected for 800 cycles, and the only entity that has invested in its maintenance, its navigational safety, and its infrastructure in the past half-century is the one sitting in this chair. She closed the folder. She had not raised her voice. She had not gestured. She had not shifted in her seat or leaned forward or done any of the physical things that delegates did when they were building to a point. She had spoken the way a person read a weather report, factual, sequential, complete. I am not here to dispute your historical claim. You surveyed the Keth sectors first. That is a fact, and I have no interest in arguing with facts. I am here to point out that between your survey and this session, 1,742 cycles passed, and in those 1,742 cycles, the Vithani did not visit, did not maintain, did not navigate, did not inhabit, did not develop, and did not monitor the territory you are now asking the conquered to affirm as yours. She opened the folder again, a different section, a tab marked in red. I have a list. I am going to read it, and then I would like to discuss it. A list of things my government has done in the Keth sectors in the past 6 years. It is not a long list, but it is a complete one. Tenek made no gesture of invitation. She read it anyway. Keth 9, soil analysis stations on 2 planets, atmospheric monitoring on 1, navigational beacons on 3 waypoints, debris field survey and publication, 1 agricultural feasibility study still in progress, 31 research staff rotating on 6-month assignments. Keth 10, mineral survey station on 1 planet, water table analysis on 1 moon, navigational beacons on 2 waypoints, 14 research staff. Keth 11, the greenhouse I mentioned, soil analysis station, atmospheric monitoring. A small medical clinic for research staff, which has also treated 11 non-human travelers who passed through the sector and needed assistance. Navigational beacons on 4 waypoints, 22 staff. Keth 12, orbital debris survey and mapping. The data is published and available to all conquered member states, including yours. Navigational beacons on 4 waypoints, no surface presence. Keth 13, geological survey on 2 planets, water table analysis on 1, navigational beacons on 2 waypoints, 9 staff. Keth 14, atmospheric survey on 1 planet, 1 navigational beacon, 3 staff. She closed the folder again. Total human presence across the 6 sectors, 79 research staff, 22 navigational beacons, 6 soil stations, 4 atmospheric monitors, 2 water table analyses, 1 mineral survey, 1 debris field survey and published map, 1 greenhouse, 1 medical clinic and 2 repaired Vithani survey pylons. Total duration of sustained activity, 6 years. Total investment, classified, but I will tell you that it is not large by human standards. We are a provisional diplomatic bureau. Our budget is modest. She looked at Tenek. What I will not tell you is the number I came here to discuss. Tenek leaned forward by a centimeter. In a being of his height, a centimeter of lean was noticeable. What number? The number of conquered precedent cases in which a provisional status species with active, sustained presence in a neglected territory has been granted sovereign recognition over a historically claiming species with no active presence. She waited. There are 4, she said. I have read all 4 rulings. Your legal analysts have cited 3 of them in your precedent file on pages 207, 231, and 289. In each case, your analysis presents the ruling as support for the historical claimant. In each case, the ruling actually went in favor of the active presence party. I have the original ruling texts in this folder. I brought paper copies because the digital versions in the Concord Legal Archive are behind a paywall that costs 40 credits per document, and I was not sure your legal team had purchased them. The chamber held still. Dulsk, by the door, watched the security detail. None of them moved. None of them needed to. The security detail was trained to respond to physical threats. Nothing physical was happening. What was happening was a woman in a chair methodically removing the floor from beneath a 312-page argument, and the security detail could not help with that. I purchased them, she continued. All 4, 160 credits. The receipts are in the folder as well in case the session requires proof of access. A sound from the 3rd row. One of the legal analysts shifting weight. The amphitheater seating transmitted the shift as a faint creak that the acoustic baffling, calibrated for Vethani physiological movement, did not quite suppress. Humans moved differently. The baffling had not been designed for it. But there were no humans in the 3rd row. The creak came from a Vethani legal analyst who had just opened the precedent file to page 207 and was reading the cited ruling with what Dulsk could only describe as the body language of someone discovering that the foundation they were standing on was not connected to the ground. Tenek spoke. His voice was even, his face was bright. The precedent rulings you reference involved species with significantly longer active presence periods than 6 years. The shortest was 11 years. The Prathani-Salvar determination, cycle 5202. The active presence species had established a research station and maintained navigational infrastructure for 11 years in a sector that had been surveyed but unvisited by the historical claimant for 300 cycles. The Concord ruled in favor of active presence. Your file cites this ruling on page 231 as an example of the Concord's respect for historical documentation. The actual ruling text says, and I will read it, "Sovereignty is not an inheritance that maintains itself. It is a condition that must be demonstrated through sustained engagement with the territory claimed. Documentation of intent without evidence of action does not satisfy the standard." End quote. She said this without looking at the page. She said it the way someone said a phone number they had called every day for years. The difference between 11 years and 6 years is 5 years, Commander. It is not 1700 years. I have been in the Keth sectors for 6 years. You have not been there for 800. If the Concord has ruled against a gap of 300 cycles, I am not certain what argument survives a gap of 800. Tenek was very still. His 4 eyes were all at the same brightness. Now the upper pair had dimmed slightly. The lower pair had brightened, which meant he had stopped evaluating and started thinking. In Dulsk's experience, a thinking Tenek was more dangerous than an evaluating Tenek, because evaluation was a process and thinking was a pivot. "You are a provisional diplomatic bureau," Tenek said. "You do not have sovereign standing to file a counterclaim under Article 47. "Correct, I'm not filing a counterclaim." "Then what is this?" "An observation." She folded her hands on the table. "The Concord does not grant sovereignty by default. If your claim is sustained, you receive the sectors. If your claim is not sustained, the sectors remain undesignated. Undesignated territory is open to provisional status entities under Article 12 of the Concord Settlement Framework. My government would then file for provisional development rights, which require only active presence and demonstrated investment. We have both. She let that settle. I am not here to take your territory, Commander. I am here to point out that the territory you are claiming is territory you have not used, maintained, visited, or navigated in 800 cycles, and that the argument you have built to claim it relies on precedent rulings that, when read in full, support the opposite conclusion. If you withdraw the claim, the sectors remain undesignated, and we continue our research. If you press the claim and it fails, which the precedent suggests it will, the sectors remain undesignated, and we continue our research. The outcome for my government is the same either way. The only variable is whether the Concord's ruling includes a formal finding that your legal team misrepresented the precedent, which would be noted in the Concord's adjudicative record. She picked up her water glass, drank the other half, set it down. I would prefer not to have that finding on the record. It is not in my interest to embarrass a future neighbor. The Keth sectors are large enough for both of us, and my greenhouse has a surplus of produce that I would be happy to discuss as a separate matter if the Vethani are interested in a trade arrangement. The tomatoes came in well this year. Tenek did not respond for 8 seconds. 8 seconds in a structural determination session was a geological event. In 37 sessions, Dulsk had never seen a presiding commander fail to respond within 4. The protocol manual specified 3 as the standard maximum. 8 seconds meant that the commander was not formulating a response. It meant he was abandoning the one he had prepared and building a new one from materials he had not expected to need. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The formal cadence, the measured, weighted rhythm of Vethani diplomatic presentation was gone. What replaced it was something Dulsk had heard only twice in his career. The plain, undecorated speaking voice of a Vethani who was no longer performing authority and was instead simply talking. Your medical clinic on Keth 11, Tenek said. You mentioned it treated 11 non-human travelers. Yes. Were any of them Vethani? The question was not in the session brief. It was not in the precedent file. It was not part of any strategic framework. It was a question asked by a person who had heard something that caught on a hook he had not known was there. 2, she said. A survey vessel crew on a long-range cartographic mission through the outer shelf. Their navigator sustained a joint compression injury during a high-gravity survey. Our clinic stabilized the injury and fabricated a compression brace using our orthopedic printer. The brace was designed to Vethani skeletal specifications, which we had on file because the Concord Medical Registry publishes species-specific anatomical references for exactly this purpose. The navigator wore the brace for 11 days until his ship reached a Vethani medical facility. We did not charge for the treatment. We filed the medical report with the Concord. And the second, an engineering specialist on a solo transit through the corridor. She stopped at our Keth 11 station because our navigational beacons, the ones we installed, were the only operational reference points in the sector, and her navigation system needed a calibration waypoint. We calibrated her system, resupplied her consumables, and she stayed for dinner. She said the tomatoes were interesting. Dulsk, standing at the door, watched the room reconfigure itself. The shift was not physical. No one moved, no one spoke, no one adjusted their seating position or reached for a data slab. The shift was in the architecture of attention. For 60 minutes, the room had been organized around Tenek. His position at the apex, his delegation filling the gallery, his security detail lining the walls, his 312-page analysis anchoring the argument. The woman had been a single point at the bottom of the amphitheater, small and solitary and surrounded. But the geometry had inverted. The 46 delegates were now watching Tenek the way an audience watched a performer who had forgotten his lines. The security detail was looking at the floor. The legal analysts in the second and third rows had stopped conferring, and were reading their data slabs with the focused intensity of people who were rereading something they had already read and finding that it said something different than they remembered. Tenek sat at the apex and understood all of this because Tenek had not become commander of the Diplomatic Expeditionary Corps by failing to read rooms. He read this one perfectly. He read the woman at the respondents' table and understood that she had not won because she had built a better argument. She had won because she had read his argument more carefully than his own team had, and she had come to his session carrying the corrections in a paper folder because paper did not require a network connection, a paywall subscription, or a legal team. "You purchased the ruling texts," he said. 160 credits. "My legal team did not. They cited them without reading them. The citations were accurate. The conclusions they drew from the citations were not. It is a common problem with large precedent files. The volume of material creates an assumption of thoroughness that substitutes for actual review. And you reviewed them." "I reviewed everything. Your 312-page analysis, the 17 precedent cases it cites, the 12 Concord regulatory sections it references, the cartographic survey data from the third expansion, the transit records from the Concord registry, and the maintenance logs for the Keth corridor navigational infrastructure. It took me about 3 weeks. I had help from a colleague who is good with transit data, and I brought the folder because I was not sure you would want to take my word for it." 3 weeks. "We are a small bureau. We do not have a legal team. We do not have a strategic precedent researcher or a cartographic survey team. We have 4 people and a budget that would not cover the catering surcharge for this chamber. What we have is time, patience, and a filing system that does not lose documents." Tenek's 4 eyes settled to a uniform low glow. The brightness was gone. What replaced it was not defeat. The Vethani did not have a physiological expression for defeat because their evolutionary history had not required one, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked, on a 2.5-meter elongated frame, like the controlled stillness of a large structure absorbing a load it had not been engineered for. "The session will recess," Tenek said. "Of course. I will need time to review the ruling texts you have referenced." "I brought copies." She reached into the leather case and produced a second folder, thicker than the first, with tabbed sections corresponding to the 4 precedent rulings. She held it up. "Paper copies, 160 credits worth. Consider them a gift from the Earth Provisional Diplomatic Bureau." A delegate in the 4th row made a sound. It was not a word. It was the Vethani phoneme for a cognitive event that had no direct translation in most languages, but was approximately equivalent to the human experience of stepping onto a stair that was not there. The sound carried in the acoustic baffling, which had been calibrated for Vethani vocalizations, and therefore reproduced it with perfect clarity to every seat in the amphitheater. Tenek looked at the folder. "I will accept the copies. The receipts are included. Page 1, I itemized them." He stood, 2.5 meters of matte gray diplomatic architecture rising from the apex seat. His secondary arms reached down and accepted the folder from across 3 rows of delegates, because Vethani's secondary arms had a reach that made physical proximity optional. The folder looked small in his hands. The contents did not. "Recess," he said again. The delegates rose. 46 tall gray figures unfolding from their seats in sequence, the movement flowing down the amphitheater like a wave retreating from a shore. The security detail peeled off the walls and followed. The legal analysts gathered their data slabs and did not look at each other. The woman remained seated. She poured another glass of water. She opened her original folder to a page near the back, pulled a pen from her jacket pocket and made a note. The pen was a ballpoint, blue ink. Dulsk approached her because it was his job to ensure that all parties in a booked session had what they needed, and because He was curious in a way that he recognized as unprofessional but could not suppress. "May I bring you anything? Refreshments are available from the diplomatic commissary." "No, thank you, the water is fine." The session may recess for several hours. The commander's review process is typically thorough. "I have time." Dulsk looked at the folder on the table. The red-tabbed section was still visible. "You read the entire precedent file, 312 pages. Twice. And the ruling texts behind the paywall. 4 documents, 160 credits. I submitted the expense to our bureau chief with a note that said, 'Insurance.' He approved it without asking what it was for. He trusts me with the stationary budget." Dulsk considered this. He had facilitated 37 structural determination sessions in his career. He had seen delegations of 100, delegations with mobile command centers, delegations that brought their own furniture. He had never seen a delegation of one, and he had certainly never seen a delegation of one that had disassembled a 6-month legal campaign in 60 minutes using a paper folder, a ballpoint pen, and 160 credits. "Your bureau chief," he said, "the one who approved the expense, does he know you are here alone?" "He wanted to come. I told him I did not need help with this particular session, and that someone should stay at the office to answer the phone in case the Vethani engineering specialist called back. She said she might want more tomatoes." "You anticipated the session's outcome." "I anticipated that the precedent file would not survive contact with the original ruling texts. The rest followed from there. If the legal foundation of a 312-page argument can be corrected with 4 documents that cost 40 credits each, the argument is not 312 pages. It is 4 documents. Everything else is scaffolding built on an unchecked assumption." She said this without judgment. She said it the way a structural engineer might note that a bridge had been built with 1 bolt missing, not to blame the builders, but to explain why the bridge was not going to hold. "The tomatoes," he said, "in the greenhouse. Keth 11, they are doing very well. The soil composition is unusual high in a mineral we had not encountered before, and the tomatoes are producing a flavor profile that our agricultural team describes as remarkable. We have more than we need." "I have never tried a tomato." "You should. I can arrange a shipment through the provisional trade channel. No surcharge. The paperwork is 1 page. Dulsk's 2 primary eyes blinked in sequence, which was the Prathani expression for considering an offer that was simultaneously unexpected and appealing. 1 page. 1 page. We designed the form ourselves. It is clear, concise, and includes a checkbox for dietary restrictions." He looked at the respondent's chair, at the woman sitting in it, at the paper folder and the blue ballpoint pen and the empty water glass. He thought about the 46 delegates currently reconvening in the corridor outside, rereading their own precedent file with the sudden, uncomfortable attention of students who had discovered that the exam-covered material they had assumed was optional. "I will submit the request," he said. "I will have the tomatoes ready." He returned to his position by the door. The chamber was quiet. The portable lights hummed. The woman sat at the respondent's table and wrote another note in her folder, and the sound of the ballpoint pen on paper was the only sound in a room that had been designed to amplify the voices of 46 Vethani delegates, and had instead spent 60 minutes amplifying the silence of a single human who had nothing to raise her voice about. The recess lasted 4 hours. 10X's legal team occupied a secondary conference room on the same deck, and Dulsk, whose responsibilities included monitoring the status of active sessions, walked past the room twice during the recess and both times heard the same thing. Silence punctuated by the sound of data slabs being set down on a table with more force than the manufacturer recommended. The legal analysts read the ruling texts. The ruling text said what the woman had said they said. They cross-referenced. The cross-references confirmed. The strategic precedent researcher went through the 312-page analysis page by page and found that the three cited rulings had been summarized by their conclusions rather than their holdings, which was the kind of error that looked like thoroughness from a distance and looked like a structural flaw from inside the document. The historical records specialist, when asked to verify the monitoring network's decommission date, discovered that the fourth consolidation records had been archived in a format that the current Vethani data system could not natively read. The woman's figure of 800 cycles was correct. The specialist's own estimate, prepared for the analysis 6 months ago, had been 760, a rounding error based on an incomplete database migration that nobody had caught because nobody had checked the original records, because the original records were in a format nobody used anymore. At the 90-minute mark, Dulsk heard a voice from inside the conference room, one of the legal analysts, pitched low but carrying. She spent 160 credits in 3 weeks. We spent 6 months and a staff of 17. No one responded to this observation. Its accuracy did not require confirmation. When Tenek returned to the chamber, he was accompanied by 3 delegates instead of 46. The security detail did not return. The legal analysts did not return. The cartographic survey team, the historical records specialist, and the strategic precedent researcher did not return. 3 delegates and Tenek. The woman was still in her chair. The folder was still open. The pen was in her hand. "I have reviewed the ruling texts," Tenek said. "I assumed you would. Your reading of the precedent is accurate. I know. The Vethani Diplomatic Expeditionary Corps will withdraw the sovereignty claim for sectors Keth 9 through Keth 14. Thank you. The withdrawal is not a concession of your counterposition. It is a reassessment of our own. I understand. I did not have a counterposition. I had observations." Tenek looked at her, 4 amber eyes dimmed to their lowest, steadiest glow. The look of a commander who had entered a room expecting to announce a verdict and was leaving it having received one. "The tomatoes. The greenhouse on Keth 11. The surplus is available for trade discussion. I have a 1-page form." "You have a 1-page form for everything." "We are a small bureau. Efficiency is a necessity, not a preference." Tenek's secondary arms folded behind his back. His primary arms hung at his sides. In Vethani body language, this was the posture of a person who had finished a task and was assessing the landscape that remained. "Your bureau." 4 people. 4 people, Commander. And in 6 years, you established research stations, navigational infrastructure, medical facilities, agricultural projects, and a filing system that outperformed a 6-month legal campaign by a diplomatic expeditionary corps. We also repaired 2 of your survey pylons. So I am told. The one on Keth 11 is in the greenhouse. It broadcasts through our relay. We were not sure who to notify about it, so we forwarded the data to the last known address on the transponder. The address has been dead for 800 years, but the logs show that we tried. Tenek did something that Dulsk had never seen a Vethani commander do in a structural determination session. His lower eyes brightened until they matched the upper pair, and then all 4 dimmed together to a steady, warm amber glow. It was not the glow of displeasure or evaluation or strategic calculation. It was the glow of recognition. "I will send a team to collect the survey pylons," he said. "They are, as you noted, historical artifacts. They belong in a museum, not in a methane lake. You are welcome to them. We can extract the submerged one on Keth 13 if you provide the recovery specifications. Our geological team has the equipment. The seasonal lake recedes in approximately 4 months, which would simplify the operation considerably. You would recover our property for us. You maintained it for 1700 years. We can manage a retrieval. The one on Keth 9 is embedded in rock, but our mining survey crew has a portable extraction rig that could free it without damaging the transponder housing. I would want to coordinate with your preservation office to ensure the artifact is handled to Vethani archival standards. We have the contact form for your archival standards office, but the form is written in a Vethani administrative dialect that predates our translation database. We filed for a translation assist through the Concord Language Services Bureau. It is pending. A sound that might, under different circumstances, have been laughter moved through the 3 remaining delegates. The acoustic baffling caught it and held it in the upper registers of the chamber like a note that did not quite resolve. We will miss the one in the greenhouse, though. The tomato vines have been growing around it. Leave it. I beg your pardon. Leave the pylon in the greenhouse. Consider it a marker of Vethani historical presence in your tomato garden. The woman looked at him. For the first time in the session, something shifted in her expression. The professional composure, the quiet patience, the flat calm that had carried her through 60 minutes of being the smallest person in a room designed to make her feel smaller, all of it remained. But beneath it, just visible, was the faint edge of a smile. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just the look of a person who had come to a meeting, expecting a fight, and had found, at the end of it, something that might eventually be a neighbor. I would like that, she said. Tenek turned and walked out. 3 delegates followed. The door closed. Dulsk stood at his position and watched the woman pack her folder into the leather case. The brass clasp clicked shut with the sound of something completed. She stood, pushed the chair in, picked up the empty water glass, and looked around for a place to set it. I will take that, Dulsk said. Thank you, she handed him the glass. The chamber was very nice. I am sorry about the lights. The overhead arrays experienced a diagnostic anomaly. Yes, I noticed they came back on about 10 minutes into the session. I assumed someone fixed them. Dulsk looked up. The overhead arrays were on, both of them. Full illumination, 6200 Kelvin, the exact color temperature that Tenek had specified in Appendix C. He had not noticed them come back on. No one had. The portable lights on the floor were still running, their omnidirectional glow now redundant beneath the even wash of the overhead arrays. They appear to have resolved themselves, he said. Things do that sometimes. She put the leather case under her arm and walked to the door. Her flat shoes made no sound on the stone floor. At the threshold, she turned back. Dulsk. Yes. The tomato form. When you submit it, check the box for ambient temperature preference. The Keth 11 variety does better in cool storage, and I would not want them to arrive wilted. I will note it. Thank you, it was a pleasure. She left. The door hissed shut. The overhead arrays hummed at 6200 Kelvin, bright and even, illuminating an empty amphitheater and a respondent's table with nothing on it but a water carafe and a single chair that had been slightly too low for a Vethani, but exactly right for a human who had not needed it to be higher. Dulsk looked at the empty room, 46 seats, each with a small depression where a Vethani delegate had sat. The respondent's position, bare except for the carafe. The apex seat, where Tenek had presided, now unoccupied and 12 centimeters higher than the rest. The portable lights humming uselessly on the floor. He began to power them down, one by one. As he worked, he thought about the session, not the arguments or the precedents or the territorial claim. He thought about the leather case and the brass clasp and the blue ballpoint pen, and the one-page form with a checkbox for dietary restrictions. He thought about the fact that a bureau of 4 people had done in 6 years, what a diplomatic expeditionary corps had not done in 800. And they had done it not with fleets or legal teams or strategic precedent researchers, but with soil stations, navigational beacons, and a greenhouse full of tomatoes growing around a 1700-year-old survey pylon. He powered down the last portable light. The room was bright. The overhead arrays, whatever had ailed them, were working perfectly now. He picked up the water carafe, tucked it under his arm, and walked to his office. On the way, he stopped at his workstation and opened the Concord Provisional Trade Portal. He found the form for agricultural commodity transfer, a standard Concord document, 7 pages, requiring 4 authorization signatures and a xenobiological impact assessment. Beneath it, in the portal's recently added forms section, was a second option: 1 page, clear fields, a checkbox for dietary restrictions, filed by the Earth Provisional Diplomatic Bureau. Form title: Agricultural Surplus Transfer Request Simplified. He selected it. He checked the box for cool storage. He typed tomatoes in the commodity field and Dulsk, Facilities Coordinator, Briefing Services, in the recipient field. The form had a final field at the bottom, labeled Additional Notes Optional. He considered it for a moment. Then he typed, 1 crate, please. I have never tried a tomato, but I have been told they are remarkable. He submitted the form. 1 page, no surcharge. The confirmation arrived in 4 seconds, which was faster than any Concord form he had ever filed. The confirmation included a delivery estimate of 3 days and a note from the Bureau. Looking forward to it. We included an extra tomato for your supervisor in case they are curious. They had anticipated the next question before it was asked. They had included the answer before the question existed. Dulsk closed the terminal, picked up the carafe, and walked to the maintenance depot to return the portable lights. The overhead arrays in Chamber 9 were still on, bright and steady, and he made a note to update the diagnostic log. Anomaly resolved, cause undetermined, no further action required. Some things fixed themselves. Some things were fixed so quietly you never noticed until the lights came back on, and the room was bright and someone had left a 1-page form where a 7-page form used to be.